In June 2022, Rachel Monroe, 29 years old, vanished without a trace on a narrow trail branch in Zion National Park. For 3 years, she was presumed to have died from a fall, exhaustion in the Rocky Desert, or becoming the victim of someone hiding in the Utah wilderness. But then in September 2025, she suddenly reappeared inside a cold rock cave, alive, but completely inexplicable by any previous theories. What she told investigators once she was able to speak left even the most seasoned ISB agents speechless. Where she had been for those 3 years and who had been with her in the darkness of Zion, you'll find out in this video. Enjoy. Some names and details have been changed to protect identities and privacy. Before diving deep into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The early summer morning in Zion National Park appeared with the dry, scorching, and fierce beauty characteristic of Utah's Red Rock region. Towering cliffs, rising straight like natural walls, extending into layers of sedimentary rock glowing in orange-brown hues, while the first sunlight of the day slanted through sharp cuts on the rock surface, creating countless beams of reflected light sparkling like hot metal. Wind rushed out from the canyon slots with unusually strong force, carrying a chill that swept through the narrow trail sections and brought along the scent of hot sand mixed with pine resin. Rachel Monroe, 29 years old, appeared in that scene with a lightweight ash-gray backpack and a camera that had accompanied her for many years. She hiked alone, as was her habit whenever she wanted to find secluded spots to capture pristine landscapes. Zion in the early morning wasn't crowded yet, with only a few scattered groups of hikers passing by, their footsteps echoing lightly on the dry ground, blending with the sound of birds darting past before disappearing into the deep, echoing canyon. The stone paths opened up before Rachel's eyes, leading into a part of the park where light was fragmented by massive boulders, causing areas of light and shadow to alternate like a giant maze. The atmosphere here was both serene and vast, to the point where human presence felt very small. Every pebble falling, dry leaf swept by the wind, or the faint rustle of backpack fabric against clothing echoed clearly as if the cliff walls were listening. The last witness to see Rachel recounted that they encountered her standing alone on a large protruding rock at a curve in the trail, where the ground sloped gently downward before vanishing into the shadow of a narrow slot below. Rachel raised her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, the light reflecting off her camera lens, making her image sparkle for a few seconds. Like a small dot against the massive rock painting behind her, she stood still for a long time, observing the long shadows cast from the high cliffs, then, according to the witness, smiled faintly, a light smile, as if she was satisfied with something she had just discovered. After that, she turned around, adjusted her backpack strap with a slow motion, then stepped into the narrow trail section hidden behind the mountain edge, where light was almost completely blocked and the wind's direction changed, sounding like a distant call. As the sun gradually set behind the Watchman Ridge, the town of Springdale outside the park began bustling with tourists returning after a long day, but Rachel did not appear at the meeting point with her friend as planned. Calls to her phone rang but went unanswered. Messages sent, received no reply. Night fell faster than usual, the sky tinged with the deep purple characteristic of Zion after sunset. But Rachel's motel room remained empty, the bed undisturbed, lights off, and no sign that she had returned to rest. Her friend began to worry, calling back to Flagstaff to ask if the family had heard from Rachel that day. Upon learning that the family had no news either, the worry immediately turned into vague fear. Trying to call a few more times, still met with silence. At this point, they no longer hesitated. Rachel Monroe's family decided to report to the police, because no one could reach her in the vast and cold wilderness of Zion. When the call from Rachel Monroe's family was transferred to the Washington County Sheriff's Office, the quiet evening atmosphere in the Springdale area was immediately disrupted. Disappearances in Zion were not rare, but vanishing without any trace right from the first afternoon was something that immediately drew attention from authorities. Just minutes after the call, a night-duty deputy confirmed with the family that they would send personnel to contact the National Park Service Ranger team to check the logout system, the mechanism recording visitors leaving the park, and only one piece of information was returned: No data indicating Rachel Monroe left Zion today. That result made Sheriff Hank Rollins realize this was no longer a case of someone returning late or having a dead phone battery. If Rachel had truly entered the wilderness in the morning as the witness described, and by evening had not appeared at shuttle stops, not left the park, and not returned to the motel, then she was somewhere in Zion or had encountered something unexpected. The investigation team immediately shifted to rapid response mode. A field command post was temporarily set up at the Zion Canyon Visitor Center, where rescue personnel could coordinate nighttime activities. White floodlights were turned on, illuminating part of the wide stone yard in front of the building. Rescue vehicles and specialized SUVs lined up in the parking lot. The atmosphere, usually serene in Zion after sunset, was now replaced by the urgent movement of rangers and deputized officers preparing for a nighttime search, always much more difficult than daytime due to complex terrain and limited visibility. A group of rangers with headlamps and communication equipment headed straight to the trailhead where Rachel was last seen. Thick darkness swallowed nearly all artificial light, and the night wind whipping through the canyon carried a sharp chill, making every sound echoing off the cliffs feel heavier. The rangers scanned the trailhead area, checking the flattest ground sections for footprints, fabric fibers, dragged rocks, any sign that could indicate Rachel's direction of travel. But the ground in this area was mostly rock, and sand pushed into small patches by the wind, so it left no clear wear marks. Everything was just a confused surface of red sand and gravel, showing no indication of which way Rachel had gone after turning into the narrow trail branch. Meanwhile, two other rangers used powerful lights to sweep the cliff edge areas, where one could look out over the pitch-black canyon bottom below. No fabric scraps, no fallen backpack, no reflection from any belongings. The heavy atmosphere made every passing minute feel longer, but they knew they had to conduct the initial assessment quickly before the temperature dropped further. In the field command post, Sheriff Rollins and the investigation team began sketching three main possibilities based on the scant information they had. First possibility: Rachel took a wrong turn, entering a trail section too narrow or too steep without realizing, especially in areas where light changes rapidly. Second possibility: Rachel had an accident, slipping or getting stuck in hard-to-reach terrain, preventing her from continuing or returning. Third possibility: a situation involving third-party intervention, something every investigator disliked considering early on, but still had to include on the list. The possibilities were written on the board in large, clear letters for easy team coordination. Out there, Zion remained dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But inside the command center, radios continuously transmitted intermittent reports from rangers tracing every meter of trail in the night. Temperatures continued to drop. Wind blew stronger through the mountain slots, and no one on the rescue team said it aloud, but everyone understood. A person disappearing in Zion during the day was concerning, but one vanishing without any trace before nightfall that was truly unusual. The investigation had officially begun, and the first night was just the start of a journey more mysterious than anyone on the team could imagine. The next morning began before sunlight even reached the bottom of Zion Canyon. The field command post was already lit up, radio chatter mixed with hurried footsteps echoing throughout the area. It was colder than expected, thin frost covering the rock surfaces making the night shift rangers look tired, but no one left their post for more than a few minutes. As the clock passed dawn, the investigation team decided to deploy the first sweep of the day, a wide-area search operation, to determine if Rachel Monroe was still within the range of the trail she entered the previous day. Drones were launched immediately, rotor blades whirring strongly, creating a sharp, cold sound echoing through the canyon. Thermal imaging equipment operated precisely, scanning strip by strip of terrain from low rock layers up to the steep cliffs above. Screens at the command post displayed continuously moving heat maps, mostly covered in blue-green patches indicating low background heat. No red or orange signals indicating human body heat. Drone technicians changed scan angles multiple times, flying deep into narrow slots that were hard to access, but results remained empty. A ranger standing nearby pointed at the screen, voice low but clear. Nothing at all. Not a single hotspot. This raised concerns, but no one rushed to conclusions. Zion's terrain could block light, block heat, block even a human body. If the victim was trapped under a boulder, or lying inside a slot just wide enough for wind to pass through. Drones continued flying to expand the range, but everything was just the coldness of rock and lingering shadows from the previous night. When the drones returned, the ground ranger team began sweeping the route that Rachel was believed to have entered. The rock surface in this area was hard sandstone, some parts flat like cement flooring, others uneven with pebbles, making footprints very difficult to retain. The lead ranger bent down to check a section of trail with darker marks, but when lightly scraping with the tip of a trekking pole, red sand fell away, revealing smooth rock that retained no bootprint patterns whatsoever. In the pale golden light of early morning, the ground was almost clean to the point of being unanalyzable. Nothing, the ranger said quietly. No footprints, no soil slides, no fabric scraps. This made every hypothesis even harder to predict. One would expect signs of a slip or footsteps veering off, but instead there was absolute silence from the ground, a kind of silence often meaning the victim may have left the trail in a way the rock did not record. The rangers continued tracing the narrow route, leading into the eastern rock formations. Small cracks, patches of fallen rock, a few dry grass strands whipped against the cliff walls, all could form signs, but none were specific enough. One of the rangers looked up at the cliff towering several dozen meters high, where light reflected in shimmering bands on the rock face, then nodded to the K9 team waiting behind. Immediately, 2 search dogs were released to track Rachel's scent from the last point the witness recorded. Her scent still lingered faintly, torn by the wind, but not completely gone. The K9 team moved quickly through the initial trail section, then turned into the rocky debris area where the path curved gently with the slope. The only moment carrying hope occurred when the lead K9 suddenly changed direction, running faster for a few beats and pulling its handler toward a jumble of jagged rocks. The atmosphere suddenly tensed like a drawn string. Everyone stood still watching, waiting for something, anything that could confirm Rachel had passed here the day before. But just seconds later, the dog stopped right at the base of a vertical cliff wall, where wind from above blew strongly downward, making sounds echo like the stone's sigh. It sniffed intensely, shifting from left to right, then suddenly lifted its head, as if the scent had just vanished from the air. The handler signaled the dog to try again from the start, but the result was the same. Rachel's scent stopped right at the foot of the cliff wall, not advancing upward, not turning left, not circling right, as if she had melted into the rock, or entered a path no one could see. One ranger stepped back a few paces, observing the K9's stopping point, his eyes showing the thought everyone was trying to avoid. If she's not on the trail surface, he said slowly, then maybe she left this path. Not accidentally, possibly intentionally, or by being forced to leave. Those words, though no one dared say them outright yet, opened up the possibility considered that very morning. Rachel Monroe may have stepped off the trail, not in the way expected in a lost hiker case. The investigation thread, from this moment, was no longer simple. The morning continued to pass, with sunlight starting to slant along the towering cliff faces, making them look like they were burning in deep orange hues. The search team had swept the initial trail section and the area around the K9 stopping point, but there were no additional signs to lead them further. However, lead ranger Connor Hale did not give up. He knew that when a scent trail stopped abruptly like this, there were usually 2 possibilities. The victim changed direction in a way, leaving few traces, or entered terrain where wind erased the scent immediately. Connor requested the K9 team return to the stopping point and expand the radius in an arc pattern. It took only a few minutes before the lead dog picked up something faint again and began pulling its handler away from the cliff wall, toward a terrain branch even harder to spot from close distance. That rock branch was not a trail. It was just a section of wall eroded by wind into a recess, forming a flat surface no wider than 4 footsteps, adjacent to a narrow slot wedged between 2 large rock slabs. Most visitors would pass by without noticing an entry wide enough for someone to squeeze into. But the K9 stopped exactly there, head lowered, breathing rapidly, tail wagging in the scent here signal pattern. Connor stepped forward, shining a light into the slot. From a few steps away, it looked no different from a natural rock crack. But as the beam penetrated deeper, the first thing catching his attention was not the floor inside, but the air. A stream of cold air blew out from deep in the darkness, cold enough that touching the face caused a shiver, completely opposite to Zion's dry roasting heat in the morning. It was not ordinary cool breeze, but the kind of chill exhaling from a vast, deep, light-blocked space. Connor stepped back, exchanging glances with the nearest team member. "Feel that?" he asked. The other nodded. "This wind isn't from the surface. There's space inside." Cold air from narrow slots is common in Zion, but this sensation was unlike natural air escaping an open ravine. It was steady, consistent, and seemed to carry the damp smell of a sheltered place, a scent completely foreign to a sun-baked trail in midsummer. When Connor lightly touched the rock edge, he clearly felt the contrast. Outside hot, inside cold, with the temperature boundary changing abruptly like standing before the entrance to an unmapped rock chamber. He requested the detailed geological map the ranger carried. The whole team looked at the map, and as they feared, this area was not marked with any side paths, no notes of deep slots, and not in any tourist documents. "This isn't marked," one ranger said, voice low. "No designated entry, no danger warnings, no path." Connor shone the light, several meters deeper. Inside was thick darkness, enough to swallow the beam entirely. No sound of water, no movement, no echo response, unnaturally quiet. When he tried saying a short phrase to test acoustics, the sound vanished after one breath, no reverberation. "Sealed chamber," he muttered, "or a passage leading downward. A visitor turning into an unmapped rock slot is rare, but not impossible." However, what unsettled the investigation team was that Rachel would have had to walk very close to the rock edge, bend down, and actively turn in to reach this path. It was not a random direction anyone would accidentally step into. Not a typical accident. Not a place a lost person would wander into by chance. The K9 sniffed strongly into the narrow slot again, this time more intensely, as if the scent led deeper inside. But just seconds later, it stopped abruptly again, starting to circle as if disoriented. The scent was there, but diluted, and carried by the constant outward cold airflow. This indicated that Rachel, or something carrying her scent, had been near this area, but may have been blown outward by wind from inside. A form of scent pulled in another direction, not the kind of scent stopped from the victim changing direction on the surface. Connor stood up, eyes still fixed on the rock slot. "If she went in here," he said in a low voice, "then this isn't a trail disappearance. This is something else." No one objected. A random hiker wouldn't find their way into this slot on their own. A panicked person wouldn't choose this path. An accidental fall wouldn't lead here. This location either involved an underground structure or someone familiar with the terrain. The early morning Zion air was gradually heating up, but before them was an entrance, exhaling cold air, a paradox of nature. And that paradox began revealing what the whole team was thinking but no one had said aloud. Rachel Monroe may have left the main trail, not due to an incident, but by being led, or following something they didn't yet understand. A simple search was shifting form into an investigation. And that cold slot, though just a small crack to the naked eye, had become the turning point of the entire disappearance. Before they could proceed inside, Connor only said one thing: "We'll come back here." This is the first real clue. But deep in the rock, the cold airflow continued to blow gently, as if the place already knew they would find it and was waiting. The morning continued to drag on in a heavy rhythm as the search team returned to the field command post to review information gathered from visitors who had passed the area the previous day. Zion in summer is always crowded, and anyone present during the time Rachel Monroe was still on the trail could provide a crucial piece. Therefore, the investigation team proceeded to cross-check the full list of hikers who registered permits on the day Rachel disappeared and began interviewing each person likely to have been near that area. In just a few hours, a series of conflicting statements began to emerge, and from here, the third-party involvement suspicion was first placed on the analysis board rather than just lingering in the investigators' private thoughts. Witness A, a middle-aged man from Colorado, said he saw Rachel in the morning while stopping to rest on the trail section near the third curve. He recounted that from about 50 feet away, he saw Rachel talking to a strange man. He was standing quite close to her, he said, and both seemed to be exchanging something. No signs of tension, but I clearly remember she wasn't alone at that point. When asked to describe, he said the man was tall, wearing a brown or green shirt, possibly a ranger uniform, but not sure because I only saw for a few seconds. Rangers checked immediately. No one from their team was in that position at that time, and there were no reports of any ranger patrolling that area that day. This statement immediately created an unexplained gap. If that man wasn't a ranger, then who was he? An ordinary visitor? An unregistered trail user? Someone living off-grid? Or someone Rachel knew beforehand? There were no clear answers. Witness B provided a completely opposite description. She was a young woman from Nevada, hiking with a friend but separating for a segment to take landscape photos. She recounted that when she saw Rachel, she was walking alone, and looked like she was in a hurry. When pressed for more details, the witness said she wasn't running, but walking quickly in a way that you could sense she was trying to leave the area or avoid something behind her. She added that Rachel kept turning back to look, as if checking whether someone was following her. This completely contradicted Witness A, who said Rachel was with a man and showed no unusual signs. The investigation team marked both statements on the map. The distance and timing of seeing Rachel at the two locations seemed to overlap, but the descriptions conflicted to the point where it was hard to accept that both people had seen the same Rachel in the same situation. Witness C, a young man hiking solo, claimed he did not see Rachel directly, but heard a very quick scream, like it was cut off midway, echoing down from the canyon direction. He stopped, looked around, but saw no one. Because Zion has echo phenomena due to the vertical rock faces, it is very difficult to pinpoint the exact sound source. However, the time he heard the scream fell exactly within the period when Rachel was believed to have turned into the narrow trail branch, the route that later led to the slot area where the K-9 team stopped. When the investigation team asked if he was sure the scream was from a woman, he replied, "I can't be certain. But the sound was more like a human than an animal." This piece of information made some rangers feel uneasy. A scream in Zion is not unusual. Hikers slipping or scared of heights can cause it. But in the context of a disappearance without any trace, having a scream near the time of vanishing forced the investigation team to consider the possibility that Rachel encountered a sudden situation requiring help. However, the biggest surprise came from another witness, not through words, but through GPS data. This was a man using a handheld navigation device that stored his entire movement history. When checking the track log, the investigation team discovered something strange. A signal gap lasting from 25 to 30 minutes in the same area where Rachel was seen. This was not a normal loss of connection, because handheld GPS units usually maintain signal even in semi-narrow canyons. But this person's track log showed the signal cut almost completely for a stretch of trail. When questioned closely, the witness said he did not remember his device malfunctioning, and he had not entered an area with overhead cover or a large enough rock alcove to lose signal. He simply said he walked along the trail as usual, but the data did not record his movement for nearly half an hour. This immediately flagged an anomaly for the investigation team. GPS does not lose signal unless there is strong obstruction or intentional interference, something not common in a national park. When compiling all the statements, the analysis board began showing tangled contradictions. One witness said Rachel was with a man. One said she was hurrying or walking fast to avoid someone. One heard a scream. Another lost GPS signal at the exact time. This lack of consistency prevented the police from determining Rachel's true direction of movement. But it opened another direction, one they were forced to consider sooner than expected: the possibility of third-party involvement. No one on the team said it directly, but the silence in the command room spoke for everything. The most seasoned investigator just stood looking at the wall map, slowly adding another line to the whiteboard. Third-party involvement possible. From that moment, the Rachel Monroe disappearance was no longer an ordinary hiking accident, and these overlapping statements were just the first layer of a murky sequence, making the investigation team's path to the truth much more complicated. The midday of the second search day poured down on Zion with the characteristic dry heat that quickly soaked into rock and sand. making every movement of the rescue team feel heavier. But no one left their post. After a series of conflicting morning statements, Connor Hale decided to lead the team back to the area around the slot where the K9 had stopped. "If anything is left behind," he said, "it will be somewhere around here. Wind can carry scent away, but it can't carry physical matter." The investigation team began expanding the search radius in concentric circles, sweeping every meter of ground. A young ranger, Melissa Grant, was the first to spot what could be called a real clue. An extremely small fabric thread caught on a sharp rock ledge near the trail base, about 8 meters from the slot. It was so tiny that only when sunlight slanted across it did the thread sparkle lightly, like a thin, bright line for a moment, before vanishing again when a shadow covered it. Melissa bent down, used tweezers to pick up the thread, and placed it in an evidence bag. "The color is quite similar to Rachel's shirt," she said. Connor stood behind her, examining the thread through the plastic. Pale blue mixed with gray, the exact shade of the hiking shirt described in photos Rachel posted on social media from the morning before disappearing. But when the ranger conducted a preliminary visual examination, the result only showed about 80% similarity to the cotton spandex blend material of the type of shirt Rachel usually wore. Not enough to confirm, but impossible to ignore. However, what puzzled the team was not the thread but its position. It was too far from the last place Rachel was seen. And for the thread to catch on the ledge here, she would have had to step down close to the rock base, lean over, or brush against the sharp edge, not like the behavior of someone walking quickly or avoiding something, but like someone bending down, being pulled in another direction, or bumped by someone else. This was the first clue, but it did not explain anything specific, only opening another uncertain branch. As the rangers continued expanding the search circle, they found another detail. Not a belonging, not a clear footprint, but a rock slab with a thin scratch running along the surface. The scratch was not deep, but long enough to see with the naked eye, as if someone had dragged a sharp, hard object across it. Connor carefully lifted the slab with gloved hands. "Not an animal mark," he concluded. "The cut is too straight." Rangers photographed the scene from every 15-degree angle to compare lighting. An investigator leaned close, using a pencil tip to measure size. About 3 to 4 inches. Not symmetrical, possibly from metal, or the edge of a tool. The most unsettling part was that the scratch pointed downward from higher up, as if someone had stood on this slab or leaned against it. But the slab's position was too close to the steep drop, where a normal person would have great difficulty standing without slipping. If it was a mark intentionally left, the person would have to know exactly how to place their feet to avoid falling. If it was from impact, the important question was, who impacted it? Rachel, or the strange man witness A mentioned, or someone else? Once again, the scratch explained nothing, only creating more questions. As the team continued sweeping in the direction of wind blowing from the slot, a ranger discovered something resembling a shoe print, very faint, wedged in a corner between 2 rock layers. It was not sharp, not clear enough to determine shape definitively, but still visible as a shoe tread pattern. 3 parallel diagonal lines and 1 horizontal line crossing them. This was not the type of shoe Rachel was wearing, which had a characteristic hexagonal pattern common in hiking boots. This print was smaller than Rachel's pair, but also not a woman's shoe. "This is a man's size," the ranger said quickly. Connor knelt down, measuring each line with a ruler. "Doesn't match any ranger or volunteer on the list," he said after comparing to team shoe samples. That meant the print belonged to someone not recorded in the area, someone not in the log, not on the permit list, not captured by cameras at shuttle stops. An unidentified man had stepped close to the position where Rachel was believed to have passed. But like the other clues, the print was too faint to use as clear evidence. It could be new. It could be old. It could be unrelated. It could even belong to the man in Witness A's statement, or to someone entirely different. Connor felt this area was like a painting with half the surface peeled away. Every line was there, but none clear enough to see the true shape. And the most frustrating part was the complete absence of Rachel's personal items. No backpack, no water bottle, no hat, no sunglasses, no phone. Nothing Rachel might have dropped while walking fast, panicking, or colliding. Normally, a trail disappearance would have at least one direct related trace: a loose shoelace, a fallen water bottle cap, or a plastic piece from a backpack scraped on sharp rock. But this time, the search area was completely clean. Too clean. Clean to the point where it seemed someone had intentionally left no traces, or Rachel had not passed here alone. When the clues were brought back to the command post, the investigation team realized they did not support each other, but rather canceled each other out. The fabric thread said Rachel had been near the area, but its position said she must have brushed the rock in a direction not matching any statements. The scratched slab showed someone had impacted it, but not who or when. The strange shoe print showed a man's presence, but not certainly related to Rachel. And the absence of personal items made every hypothesis fragile. The clues appeared, but contradicted each other like wrong answers in a multiple-choice test with no correct option. Connor stood before the analysis board, looking at all the clues, then said slowly, "If this is evidence of an accident, it's the neatest accident I've ever seen. If this is evidence of getting lost, then Rachel left without leaving any signs of panic. But if someone was with her..." He left the sentence hanging. Because from this point onward, the Rachel Monroe disappearance was no longer viewed as a simple incident. It had entered the gray area where the presence of a third party was no longer just a possibility, but a real investigation direction. A direction no one on the team wanted, but could not ignore. When the clues collected in the morning, the fabric thread, the scratched rock slab, and the faint shoe print could not be pieced together into a meaningful picture, Connor Hale decided to shift to a new tactic, dividing the search into zones based on terrain characteristics. Zion is not a place that can be swept linearly like smaller parks. It is a giant maze of cold canyons, steep rock slopes, wind pockets, and sudden depressions. If Rachel or anyone else left the main trail, they could have entered one of the three most treacherous zones. Therefore, right after midday, 3 teams were assigned. The first team headed into the cold northern canyon, where wind from upstream blew down very strongly, creating cold airflow similar to the stream from the slot they had seen earlier. This area was full of thick rock slots, many places requiring squeezing through narrow sections only wide enough for one person to crawl. The terrain was so rugged that thermal drones could not penetrate most slots. The first team used ropes, trekking poles, and endoscope cameras to peer into deep rock alcoves. But most of what they saw was just darkness and cold moisture condensed on rock faces. No backpack, no slide marks, no belongings, no fabric. Only cold, empty spaces and wind tearing through like long howls. The second team moved to the eastern mountain slope where the cliff edges opened up a deep view down into the canyon bottom. This was a dangerous area because the rock here was prone to crumbling. One wrong step could send someone falling dozens of meters. But if Rachel or the strange man had gone this way, this could be the place to leave signs. Loose rocks, disturbed soil, shoe slide marks. Rangers conducted the sweep under harsh sunlight, scanning each line with low-angle lights to check for any faint shadows or scratches. But the rock surface was too clean to the point where not a single pebble was out of its natural position. Connor, upon hearing the radio report, went silent for a few seconds. An accident on a mountain slope always leaves signs, even the smallest ones. But here, there was nothing but a silent rock surface stretching hundreds of meters. The third team headed to the western rockfall area where massive sandstone blocks stacked on each other formed layers of hollow slots. This was the most likely place for someone to get trapped or hide in. The Rangers used handheld seismic vibration devices to listen for feedback echoes from inside the voids. They called Rachel's name multiple times, but the sound only bounced back like a distant voice before vanishing into the thick rock layers. The team also discovered some recently fallen rock slabs, but quick analysis showed they had fallen due to strong winds from the previous afternoon, not human impact. A young ranger, after shining a light into a deep rock slot, whispered, "It's like someone passed through here, but left no traces. Like they knew how to walk without making a sound." Though the statement wasn't based on specific evidence, it accurately reflected the entire team's feeling. Something didn't fit the pattern of a normal disappearance. And then, the weather began to become the biggest enemy. A sudden rainstorm arrived, the short but intense type characteristic of the American Southwest. Water poured down the cliff faces, flowing into strong streams, washing away soil and sand in minutes. All the tiniest traces, from faint shoe prints to possible soil streaks left by Rachel, were erased as if they had never existed. The search team was forced to retreat to safe positions while water from above cascaded down, creating temporary waterfalls rushing through the canyon slots like blades. When the rain stopped, the ground became slick rock, and all that remained was a washed clean layer of sand. When all three teams returned to the command post in the early afternoon, the situation was virtually unchanged. No traces, no objects, no specific direction. The 3 points of hope, the cold canyon, the eastern slope, the rockfall area, had been swept multiple times, but yielded no discoveries, leading to Rachel. Connor looked at the map marked with red dots where they had searched, then at the large blank areas still inaccessible. "Everything we have," he said, "is just clues that don't connect." Another ranger added, "And now any traces that might have existed have been washed away by the rain." By the end of the day, the search results were zero. A frightening emptiness, especially when every possible direction leading to Rachel gave the exact same result. Nothing. The young woman's disappearance became stranger than ever. Shoe prints, but no person. A fabric thread, but no belongings. A scratch, but no direction of flight. Clues, but no story. Everything was fragmented, contradictory, and impossible to piece into a logical timeline. As night prepared to fall again, Zion returned to its silent state, the kind of silence that made the investigation team understand they were not just searching for a missing person. They were tracing something else. Something deliberately leaving no traces. The afternoon gradually shifted to sunset as the search team returned to the area around the slot for continued sweeping of overlooked details. After the heavy rain, the ground had become strangely clean. No footprints, no debris, no clear signs that anyone had ever passed through here. But just as hope for new clues was nearly extinguished, a ranger on the 5th search circle shouted to call Connor. "Over here! Something burned recently." Connor and 2 investigators ran over. Nestled between 2 large rock slabs, in a fairly wind-sheltered position, was a small round pile of ash, like the remnants of a fire that had been lit very close to the time the rain hit. What silenced everyone for a few seconds was the obvious fact. A heavy rain like the one they had just experienced should have extinguished anything from hours earlier. Yet the ash here was still light powder, not fully soaked. Connor lightly touched it with a gloved hand. The ash rose into faint dust, too dry for the weather conditions. "Fire lit within the last few hours," he said slowly. "After Rachel disappeared, and before the rain arrived. In other words, someone had been here very close to the time the search team began approaching the area. Not old ash, not traces from a week ago, but signs of recent activity." Just as the team was trying to analyze the ash pile, another ranger called them over to a flat rock about 6 meters away. He held up a torn piece of paper, unevenly ripped, as if yanked from a small notebook. The paper was mostly blurred by rainwater, but a cluster of handwritten pencil letters remained. Very faint, but readable. "C. On." It wasn't a clear word, not a complete sentence. Just a fragment, but enough to cause a wave of silence in the team. Connor asked immediately, "Could it be Stone, Stony, or an unfinished name?" Someone replied, "Or Stone-er, if the end is missing." No one laughed, though the suggestion sounded speculative. No one wanted to end with silly assumptions, but these scattered letters, "St. on," felt like a torn piece of a map trying to say something. No one writes notes in this area. No hiker carries loose paper or writes their name on a scrap, then tosses it into a deep rock slot. And the fact it was next to the ash pile, not random. But the most unusual part was the third detail. On a higher patch of ground beside the cliff wall, a ranger found a segment of neon orange survival cord, the type commonly used in survival activities, long wilderness trips, or shelter building. But this cord segment wasn't just torn. It was cleanly cut with something sharp. Both ends were smooth, not frayed from tension or abrasion against rock. Preliminary visual analysis suggested it was cut with a knife or metal blade. Connor frowned, looking at the cord. Not Rachel's. She didn't have this type of cord in her gear. The list of Rachel's items, based on family information and camera images, showed she didn't use neon cord. Her gear always leaned toward neutral and dark colors. The clean cut itself had meaning. It wasn't discarded as trash. It wasn't washed away by rain. It lay on a clean rock ledge, as if someone had placed it down or dropped it while preparing something nearby. The three details, fresh ash, strange paper scrap, cut survival cord on their own, didn't form a coherent story. But together, they created a clear sense that someone had been present in the area right before or right after Rachel vanished. Someone who knew how to move without leaving traces. Someone careful enough not to leave personal items. But at the same time, someone who didn't seem to be truly trying to hide. The appearance of dry ash despite the rain, the paper with half-finished characters, and the cut cord made a hypothesis long considered far-fetched, suddenly more credible than ever. Perhaps in Zion there was someone living off-grid, unregistered, traceless, and existing here long enough to know how to avoid attention from all visitors and rangers. Stating this hypothesis was often seen as absurd. Zion is vast, but not the dense Alaskan wilderness or remote Montana wilds. Living hidden for years without detection was nearly impossible. Unless that person knew every side trail, every rock slot, every place with cold airflow, every spot with underground water or small springs. Connor looked at the cold wind blowing from the slot, then at the unwashed ash, and finally at the cut cord. If someone is here, he said slowly, they're not new. They know where we'll search. A female ranger whispered, and that person might have seen Rachel before we arrived. No one responded. But that feeling like invisible eyes watching from within the rock slots sent a chill through everyone. Rachel Monroe's disappearance was no longer within the frame of an accident. It had opened the door to something unseen in Zion for many years. The possibility of a hidden dweller, silent, and potentially the most crucial factor in this story. The inexplicable clues suddenly became frightening in their own way, not because they were clear, but because they were like whispers from within the rock, hinting at the presence of someone no camera, no permit, no ranger had ever seen. Rachel Monroe's disappearance from here entered a completely different phase. The investigation team internally knew this, but no one wanted to say it before more evidence. But deep down, everyone understood. Rachel might not have entered Zion alone on the day she vanished. She might have encountered someone they now had to pursue in a rock maze spanning hundreds of square miles, someone who might never have wanted to be found. On the evening of the second search day, as the air began to cool and darkness gradually swallowed the canyon edges, the Washington County Sheriff's Technical Analysis Team gathered at the command post with one task: reviewing all of Rachel Monroe's phone data. If there was no direct physical evidence, then the phone signal, the only thing Rachel carried that could tell the truth, was the most important clue. A large whiteboard was set up, showing a diagram of ping locations received from the carrier, marked with red dots in chronological order. The first ping, mid-morning on the day Rachel entered the park, was completely logical, near the visitor center area. The next ping, not long after, matched the initial trail section where witness B had seen her. But from here on, everything became strange. The final ping, the one the carrier recorded before the phone lost signal completely, was not in the area where Rachel was last seen. It was nearly 2 miles northwest, near a rock region with no official trail, where satellite maps showed bare rock and deep narrow slots that rangers do not recommend anyone enter alone. Connor circled that position on the map. Doesn't match, he said. Completely doesn't match the timeline. If Rachel had turned toward the slot as the K9 team determined, her phone should have pinged in that area at least once more. But instead, the phone sent a signal from entirely different coordinates, separated from the logical movement direction by a whole dangerous terrain section. This alone made the investigation team sit in silence for a few seconds. What was even more unusual was the 30-minute gap in the phone data. 30 minutes with no pings recorded at all, even though Zion often has signal dead zones but never complete loss over such a wide range. A 30-minute signal blackout means one of two possibilities, the technical specialist said. Either the phone was completely turned off, manually or due to battery drain, or it was taken out of signal range. But according to family information, Rachel's phone battery was sufficient for the whole day, and manually turning it off didn't fit the situation described by loved ones. Rachel rarely turned her phone off, especially when hiking alone. Connor asked directly, "What if the phone was placed deep inside a rock structure, like stuffed into a slot?" The specialist shook his head. There would still be extremely low-level pings if the device was still on. But here, it's complete loss. Connor looked back at the diagram. The final ping was in a position too far away. The previous ping had disappeared for over 20 minutes. The area where clues like the fire, ash, and paper scrap were found was not near the final ping location. Everything painted a journey that couldn't match Rachel moving on her own. Connor said quietly, as if reading everyone's thoughts. Her phone moved in a different direction, or was carried by someone. No one objected. One ranger suggested the possibility that the phone fell and rolled down a slope to the final ping area, but that didn't make sense. Falling 2 miles down a slope? Impossible. And if someone picked up Rachel's phone and took it, that opened an entirely new direction. The third party wasn't just present in the area, but capable of directly interfering with Rachel's belongings right before or right after she vanished. What chilled the entire team most was this detail. Right after the final ping was sent, the device shut off completely. No further signals, no low pings, no roaming, no flickering signals like when a phone falls into water or is crushed under weight. The phone didn't die, it was turned off. A seasoned investigator crossed his arms and said, "If Rachel turned it off, there had to be a reason. If Rachel didn't turn it off, then someone else did." These two possibilities led down two different paths, one where Rachel intentionally isolated herself from the world, or two where someone was directly involved in the action. But when placed alongside the strange earlier clues, fresh fire ash, paper reading ST on, cut survival cord, the second possibility began to feel more frightening but logical. At the end of the analysis session, Connor wrote on the board, 30-minute signal loss intervention. Not due to nature. Not due to network failure. Not due to device malfunction. The data was too clear. Rachel Monroe's phone had been forcibly disabled or taken to a place where it couldn't transmit, and this could only happen if someone was with her or gained access to her belongings in the time after witnesses last saw Rachel. When the preliminary conclusion was reached, the atmosphere in the command room grew noticeably heavier. The phone signal clue didn't specify who, but it very clearly said something was done intentionally. Rachel's disappearance no longer resembled a trail incident. It was becoming a story of deliberate action, planned, or at least involving intervention by another person. The character's Stan on the paper scrap suddenly became particularly haunting in this context, like a reminder that someone in Zion was controlling every step according to a logic the investigation team hadn't yet seen. And with the phone being turned off right after the final ping, all signs began pointing to an unavoidable reality. Rachel Monroe did not disappear alone. By the end of the 14th day, as the sun sank completely behind the Watchman Ridge and the Zion sky turned deep purple, the search for Rachel Monroe officially entered the phase no one on the rescue team wanted to consider. 2 weeks, that was the time frame every search expert understood. If no traces were found by then, the chances the victim suffered an accident or left the area in an unusual way were very high. Connor Hale, after receiving reports from the 3 search groups that day, stood before the map covered in red, green, yellow circles, once areas of hope, now just points of failure. He turned to the SAR team leader and said the words everyone already knew. "We're scaling down the large-scale search team." The statement was simple, but in the quiet space of the command post, it rang like a temporary period. Not because they wanted to give up, but because continuing rescue-style sweeping would yield nothing more. Zion had been turned upside down at maximum manpower. 76 Rangers, 4 K9 teams, thermal drones, high-angle climbing technical teams, canyon slot inspection teams. And everything led to the same result. Emptiness. No footprints. No belongings. No clothing. No body. No calls. No responses. No data suggesting Rachel left Zion via official routes. All traces were illogical or erased or never existed. As the search team began packing equipment, no one spoke. Zion at sunset was both beautiful and cruel. The cliff walls reflecting brilliant orange light, while below were deep silent slots, as if keeping every story inside them secret. A young ranger whispered while coiling rope, "If she's still here, why haven't we found anything?" An older ranger replied, "Maybe someone doesn't want us to find her." Though speculative, the words perfectly captured the heavy feeling over the entire team. When the final SAR report was signed, the case was officially removed from pure search procedures and transferred to the Criminal Investigation Units of the Washington County Sheriff and the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch, ISB. This was a very rare shift, only occurring when there was high likelihood the disappearance was no longer accidental. Connor, in the first meeting with ISB, presented all collected evidence: fresh burned ash, the ST-on, paper scrap, cut survival cord, strange shoe print, rock scratch, pale blue-gray fabric thread, the slot exhaling cold air, and most importantly, the phone data, with 30 minutes of intentional signal loss. When he underlined phone disabled or moved intentionally on the board, the room fell silent. No one on the investigation team still viewed this as a lost hiker. An accident doesn't turn off a phone. Someone voluntarily leaving the trail doesn't create strange traces like fresh ash or cut survival cord. A normal disappearance doesn't create such a complete void of physical evidence. Therefore, in the official report issued at the end of the day, Rachel Monroe's case was reclassified. Missing person suspicious circumstances. This was a higher classification than missing hiker and lower than criminal abduction, but everyone knew it was a stepping stone to prepare for large-scale criminal investigation if needed. When the classification changed, the legal mechanisms changed too. ISB gained authority to request camera footage from all shuttle stops, shops and lodgings in Springdale, all permit registration logs on the day Rachel disappeared, lists of vehicles leaving parking lots in the suspect time frame, and even license plate data from LPR systems on park access roads. They also gained authority to contact the FBI if federal elements were involved. The investigation from here entered a new phase, pursuing people, not natural traces. The first objective was to narrow down everyone present in Zion the morning Rachel disappeared. Rangers reported about 2,300 people entered the park that day. But thanks to the shuttle system and permits for certain advanced trails, they could narrow the list to about 620 people likely to have passed the area where Rachel was last seen. ISB began screening every name. Hikers reported to have left Zion before Rachel vanished were eliminated. Families traveling in groups were eliminated. Couples with joint photos, people with complete GPS track logs, groups using guided tours, all were moved to low priority. But over 100 people remained without evidence of leaving Zion on time, or with incomplete GPS data, or with statements that became unusual when cross-referenced. And among them, two groups stood out for immediate checking. 1. Solo hikers. 2. People without registered permits, but appearing in the area via camera or descriptions. Additionally, there was another group few wanted to mention but had to include: off-grid dwellers. People leaving no traces, living on society's edge, possibly hiding in deep canyons. The fresh fire ash, cut survival cord, and ST-on, paper scrap all pointed to that possibility. As the 14th night closed, the entire Rachel Monroe case had officially stepped out of the natural realm and into human territory, where motives, intentions, and identities of those present in Zion that day became the investigation's center. No one spoke of it as just a lost hiker anymore. No one held simple hope that Rachel would appear in some corner of the park. Everyone understood. To find answers, they had to find the person behind the shadows. The person Zion seemed to shelter, keep secret, and refuse to expose to light. 3 years passed since the day Rachel Monroe vanished, and Zion National Park still retained its mysteriously indifferent beauty. The red cliffs still glowed brilliantly each morning, The canyons still swallowed sounds into thick darkness, and the trails still filled with passers-by as if a 29-year-old woman had never disappeared without a trace. The official investigation had shifted to closed but unresolved status, the file placed in the ISB's long-term review list, and new rangers sometimes heard the case as a cautionary tale. Never underestimate Zion. But for the investigators who worked directly in 2022, the Rachel Monroe case never truly slept. It was a thorn, a question mark, an uncomfortable void in their careers. No one could accept that an adult could vanish completely in a place thousands entered daily. In 2025, the National Park Service launched a new program, AI-assisted backlog review, an artificial intelligence system designed to reanalyze all drone footage from unresolved search operations. This technology was trained to detect movements that the human eye might have missed: faint shadows, unusual movement patterns, small objects obscured in complex terrain. Connor Hale, now promoted to Field Operations Supervisor, submitted Rachel's file to the priority list. "If there's anything the machine can see that we couldn't," he told the technical team, "this is the case that needs to be reviewed first." The drone footage from 2022 was loaded into the system. Nearly 40 hours of flight were divided into tens of thousands of frames. Humans viewing it saw only rock, shadows, wind, and sand. But the AI saw differently. It analyzed every pixel, compared light temperatures, predicted potentially obstructed objects, and flagged areas possibly containing movement but obscured by canyon shadows. 3 days after the footage was input into the system, a yellow alert appeared on the screen. "Anomaly detected. Frame 11783. Connor immediately ran to the analysis room. On the screen, the drone was flying over a part of Zion they had swept in the first week of 2022, the western section of the trail, near the Cold Canyon area but never deeply explored. Frame 11783 looked normal to the human eye. A cliff casting shadow over a narrow slot. Wind blowing dust into the canyon bottom. Nothing noteworthy. But the AI highlighted a small area with a white square, right at the edge of a large boulder. "Zoom in 300%, Connor said. The blurry image enlarged. A shadowy figure, very small, almost just a dark patch, was crawling close to the ground, half the body hidden behind a rock slab, the other half wedged into the narrow slot extending along the canyon's fold. The movement lasted less than a second before the drone flew past the line of sight, shadows covering the entire area. "Go back 5 frames, Connor ordered. Frame 11778. Nothing. Frame 11779. Nothing. Frame 11780. A blurry movement in the corner. Frame 11781. Slightly clearer, but still just shadow. Frame 11782. The dark object moving toward the rock slot. Frame 11783. A human-like shape, shoulders, head, arms crawling into the slot. Frame 11784. Completely gone. Silence in the analysis room became heavy as rock. A young technician whispered, "How did we miss this?" But Connor didn't blame anyone. In 2022, the search team focused east and around the trail branch where Rachel was last seen. No one considered the northwest direction, where there was no trail, and maps noted only dangerous bare rock. Just a slight drone angle deviation of a few degrees, and that movement would not have been recorded. Connor requested the system reanalyze using human body movement filters. Results gave a 62% probability that the faint shadow was human, 21% a large animal, and 17% undetermined. But what chilled the entire team was the size analysis. The AI estimated the visible body length equivalent to that of an adult human. "Could it be Rachel?" a technician asked. Connor shook his head. "Clothing doesn't match. And more importantly, Rachel wouldn't crawl into slots like that unless she was forced to hide, flee, or follow someone." From the corner of the room, the ISB investigator said quietly, "And if it's the third party? The one we've suspected since 2022? The words "third party" made the room feel colder, because now, that faint shadow didn't just echo Witness A's statement, the one saying Rachel was with a man, but also recalled all the anomalies. Fresh ash, cut cord, the ST on, paper scrap, strange shoe print. Connor requested reconstructing the drone flight path and overlaying the frame position on the 3D terrain map. When the model was complete, the entire team stood still, staring at the screen. The position of the crawling figure into the rock slot overlapped with an area the 2022 search team had never set foot in, due to strong winds and excessively difficult access terrain. More importantly, it lay exactly in the direction of the cold airflow the K9 team had detected. At this moment, everything suddenly connected in a way no one wanted to admit. Rachel disappeared near a rock slot. A shadowy figure crawled into another slot in the same area on the same day. Phone data forcibly disabled. Clues from ash, cord, paper, suggesting an off-grid dweller's presence. Faint man's shoe print. Connor stood before the screen for a long time, then said in a low but firm voice, "This is the first breakthrough in 3 years. And it might be where everything truly began." No one said anything more. But everyone knew the Rachel Monroe case had just been revived, and the shadowy figure in that blurry video frame, whoever it was, would become the key leading them into Zion's darkest part. In mid-September 2025, as the investigation team was preparing a plan to access the AI-flagged area, a completely unexpected event occurred, an event no one in rescue, police, or ISB could have imagined. Instead of the special team finding the answer, the ones who discovered the lead were 3 hikers from Colorado, who accidentally wandered into the very land Connor Hale was preparing to approach. The 3, Dylan, Maya, and Trevor, were a group of young friends who favored lesser-known routes. They decided to try a shortcut tipped on a hiking forum, rumored to lead to a stunning hidden viewpoint in western Zion. But their map was unofficial, and Zion's terrain never allows casual direction changes without a price. After nearly an hour weaving through massive boulders and narrow wind pockets, the group realized they had gone completely off course. Their GPS started jumping positions due to canyon signal blockage. Dylan wanted to turn back, but Trevor, the most confident in the group, suggested pushing a few hundred more meters, because wind blowing from this direction means open space ahead. Though reluctant, the other 2 followed him. The first event making the group stop was the sound of small rocks falling from above, rolling down the slope, then vanishing into a dark void. Zion in dry season rarely drops rocks without animals or humans. Trevor looked up, squinting. "Did you guys hear that?" Maya nodded. "Someone up there?" But what chilled all 3 wasn't the rocks, but a very faint, very soft breathing sound, like from someone trying to stay quiet. It wasn't continuous. Just a long-drawn breath, then silence. Dylan stood frozen, hand gripping his backpack strap tightly. That's not wind. They shone lights into the space ahead. At first, just shadows from the cliff, but as they advanced a few steps, a rock structure resembling a cave mouth began to appear, only slightly larger than enough for one person to squeeze through. From inside, cold air blew out. Trevor said quietly, "This is exactly the kind of wind the AI scanned." He hadn't finished speaking when the sound came again. This time, like someone shifting deeper into the darkness. Maya, the calmest in the group, shone her light straight into the cave mouth. The light at first didn't penetrate the rock, swallowed by thick darkness. But just a second later, the beam touched something with a shape. Human. A figure sitting with knees drawn up near the cave edge, head slightly tilted, long hair partially covering the face. Trevor exclaimed, "There's someone in there." But before fear could race through their bodies, the figure slowly raised its head, eyes deep set from darkness but completely alert, the face gaunt, slightly ashen from lack of sun, but no sign of panic. Instead, a smile, a light, slow, and chilling smile that made the 3 feel their hearts sink. "Sorry," Dylan stammered. "Are you okay?" The person in the cave didn't answer. She just looked at them, tilting her head slightly as if assessing who they were. Then her lips gently parted, the voice emerging so small it seemed not to belong to someone who had just lived in darkness. "You've arrived." Maya immediately turned to Trevor, thinking she misheard. But the eyes of the person in the cave weren't joking. She looked like she had been waiting for someone, waiting for a very long time. Dylan turned his light brighter, hand shaking. The strong light hit the woman's face, and in that moment, Maya blurted out, "That's Rachel Monroe." They recognized her from the photo that had gone viral for 2 months after the 2022 disappearance. A girl with a quiet smile. But the face before them was a different version. Thinner, tanner, eyes deep, as if holding 3 years of darkness. Trevor stepped forward 1 step, voice almost a whisper. Rachel. Right? We'll get you out of here. At this moment, Rachel smiled a little wider. A calm smile that was unnaturally serene, as if being found was just part of a story she knew well. While they did not, she showed no fear, no tears, no trembling, no signs of exhaustion like someone who had lived isolated in a cave for 3 years. She just quietly observed. As Trevor stepped closer, he noticed 2 disturbing things. 1. Beside Rachel was an old blanket, neatly folded. 2. And deeper in the cave, the light reflected off what looked like passages continuing into the darkness, as if this cave was not just a temporary alcove, but an entire network inside. Maya, feeling increasing unease, took a step back. Is there anyone else in there? Rachel kept the smile. He's not here right now. The 3 hikers stood frozen. Her voice was light as a breath, but that statement, "he's not here," hit them harder than any falling rock. Not just because it confirmed she had not been living alone, but because it proved everything the AI detected. All the clues, fresh ash, cut cord, the ST on paper scrap, were correct. Rachel Monroe had not disappeared alone. She was in the cave. She was alive. And she had not been alone for those 3 years. When the rapid response team from the Washington County Sheriff and ISB arrived, the Colorado hikers had brought Rachel out of the cave mouth, temporarily wrapping her in a thin jacket. She remained alert, still holding that serene, near-expressionless smile. But the investigation team's focus immediately shifted from Rachel to the rock cave behind her, where the real answers might still lie. The cave mouth was narrow enough that an adult had to turn sideways to fit through. But just a few steps inside, the space unexpectedly widened into a deep negative chamber, temperature dropping sharply, air thick with the smell of damp mold and cold ash. Connor Hale led the forensics team, wearing a headlamp and stepping carefully in. The first light swept across the rough, dry ceiling, then down to the ground, revealing numerous signs of habitation, not traces of someone temporarily sheltering, but of someone who had lived here for a long time. Right near the entrance was a large ash circle, remnants of multiple fires. When Connor lightly stirred the top ash layer with a metal probe, darker ash below appeared, indicating older fires that had burned weeks to months earlier. Beside it were smaller ash circles, as if lit on different occasions. Not just once, Connor said quietly. This is cyclical. Another investigator measured ash decomposition rate and reached a similar conclusion. Fires had been lit here at least 5 or 6 times over an extended period. Next, the light shone into a corner where 3 old canned food tins were stacked in a messy row. Spam, cooked beans, and cheap canned soup commonly used for long camping trips. They had been opened cleanly with a metal tool, not smashed with rock. The cans still carried traces of congealed fat smell. One tin had fresh rust, the others dulled with time. Someone knew how to survive, an investigator said. This food isn't what Rachel brought. This is prepared for long-term stay. Connor nodded. These cans could be bought at any convenience store, but according to the 2022 list, Rachel had not purchased these items before entering Zion. A few steps away was something that silenced everyone. A rabbit snare wire segment, thin steel wire coiled into a noose loop, a hunting tool requiring real survival skill. Connor picked it up with tongs. Rachel didn't know how to use these, he said. She's not the type to trap animals. A ranger noted, wear marks on the wire. Someone adjusted it multiple times. No animal remains, but a few small bone fragments buried under sand showed they had been used. The light swept to the opposite side. There, 2 old blankets were spread into a rudimentary sleeping area on the rock floor. Blankets frayed at the edges, dusty. One thicker used as padding below, one thinner as cover above. But what sent chills down spines was how they were arranged. Neatly, flat, intentional, not like an abandoned temporary shelter. One person slept here, Connor said. And that person knew how to fold blankets, retain heat, stay dry. The female investigator examined the bottom blanket and found several hairs different from Rachel's color. Dark brown, she said. Completely different from the victim's hair. This conclusion made the entire team hold their breath. Rachel had not lived alone in the cave. A man had been here with her. Rachel had said it, but physical evidence confirming it was stronger than any statement. When forensics arrived, they began collecting samples from the ground, walls, blankets, and fire area. A DNA specialist brushed dust on one blanket, then stood up immediately. Skin cells. High quantity. Samples sealed in bags. In another corner, an old Ziploc bag lay under thin soil, still containing paper scraps. Though no clear fingerprints, it was a sign someone packed items or brought things into the cave. What stunned everyone appeared when the forensic specialist shone UV light on the wall not far from the sleeping area. Under UV, faint streaked patches appeared, not large, but enough to sample. When quick field tested with a preliminary reaction kit, the specialist said quietly, "Human protein." Connor stepped closer. "Male or female?" She shook her head. "Needs deeper lab analysis. But this sample isn't from Rachel. Too high for her reach." Overnight, DNA samples were sent to the ISB genetics lab. Preliminary results returned in just 2 lines. Profile 1. Match. Rachel Monroe. Profile 2. Male. No match in CODIS. A man had been in the cave with Rachel. Not a visitor. Not a ranger. Not permitted. And not in any criminal database. This made everything even more frightening. He wasn't a wanted criminal or someone previously arrested. He was a nameless shadow. Meanwhile, the cave terrain map built from mini LiDAR showed the cave was not a single chamber, but extended into 2 narrow passages behind one leading deep into the mountain, one curving along the slope, connecting to another slot. Connor looked at the model and concluded, if the man entered and exited via the side passage, only a drone could detect it. This perfectly matched the frame the AI captured from the 2022 footage. When the team returned outside the cave, Rachel was still sitting under a rock overhang, wrapped in Maya's jacket, gaze distant as if not really noticing the investigation unfolding around her. Trevor whispered to Dylan, "You see it? She hasn't asked about family, hasn't asked about time, hasn't asked about us." Maya replied in a chilling voice. "She's been there 3 years, and nothing in the cave shows she survived alone. Someone was there with her." The cave examination ended, but the biggest question was only beginning. Who was that man? And why did Rachel smile when found as if she already knew someone would enter the cave to find her? Rachel Monroe was taken to a temporary room at the ranger station, where soft lighting and stable temperature helped avoid shock after 3 years in cold darkness. She sat on the metal chair, wrapped in the borrowed jacket from Maya, hands placed on her lap, fingers lightly interlaced, as if keeping rhythm to a silent song only she could hear. They gave her water, a blanket, time. But Rachel seemed to need little of it. She did not look tired like someone just rescued, but like someone who understood everything more than those standing around her. ISB investigator Special Agent Vera Collins sat across from her, keeping a gentle voice but clear question structure. "Rachel, we need to know what happened over the past 3 years. Can you tell us starting from the day you entered Zion?" Rachel looked at Collins as if needing a beat to connect with the question. She blinked slowly, then said in a small but even voice, "I wasn't here alone." The statement froze the entire room. Collins exchanged a quick glance with Connor Hale standing behind the one-way mirror. This was the clearest confirmation since Rachel was found. No ambiguity, no doubt clear. Rachel emphasized each word, as if it was the most important thing she wanted to say. "Who were you with?" Collins asked. Rachel tilted her head, eyes looking somewhere past Collins's shoulder, as if trying to recall an image buried deep in the cave's darkness. She furrowed her brow slightly, not tense, but like searching for the right words to describe something too hard to define. Finally, she just said, "He told me to wait." Collins sat still for a few seconds before asking further, "Who is he? Can you describe him?" Rachel blinked slowly again, then shook her head. Not strongly, just lightly, like wind swaying a branch. I don't remember clearly. Collins leaned forward. You don't remember his face? You don't remember his voice? Rachel looked down at her hands, her thumb tracing the calluses on her dry skin. Sometimes I think I remember, she whispered. Sometimes not. Collins shifted the question. Do you remember what he called himself? Or what he called you? Rachel still didn't look up. She answered almost without emotion. He didn't use names. The investigator jotted quickly. No names, a sign of someone wanting to sever identification, or someone who knew that giving Rachel his name would make him traceable. Collins continued. Rachel, the most important thing is we need to know if you were forced to stay. Did you enter the cave on your own? Rachel raised her head very slowly, her deep eyes as if not reflecting the room's light. I don't know. Don't know? Rachel nodded, this time a bit more firmly. I remember following someone. I thought I should follow. I thought I wasn't safe out there. Not safe because of whom? Rachel closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them, there was a fleeting haze in her gaze. Because I was afraid of being found. The statement made Collins grip her pen tighter. Found by whom? Rachel shook her head again. I don't know. I just remember the feeling. Connor, standing behind the mirror, felt his heart race. This wasn't the statement of a typical captive. This was the statement of someone who had lived under psychological influence, possibly fear, possibly suggestion, or possibly dependence. Collins changed tactics. Rachel, do you remember how much time passed while in the cave? For the first time, Rachel looked straight into Collins's eyes. No blinking, no flinching. Just looking. No, I don't remember the 2 years in the middle. I only remember the first days. And the recent days. You remember nothing from those 2 years? Rachel slowly shook her head. It was very dark, very cold. I slept. A lot. He brought food, then disappeared, then came back, then disappeared again. Did you ever leave the cave? I think so, Rachel replied. But I don't remember. Collins added a line. Possible induced dissociation. Finally, the investigator tried asking the question everyone wanted to hear. Rachel, can you give us any details about him? Build? Voice? Smell? Habits? Rachel was silent for a very long time. So long that Collins wondered if she would answer at all. But then Rachel whispered, as if only to herself. He was very quiet. Quiet? Rachel nodded. He never came closer than necessary. Never touched me unless to hand food. Never took his eyes off the cave entrance. As if he was afraid of something outside. Afraid of whom? Collins asked. Rachel's eyes flickered slightly. She answered with the exact phrase that had haunted the group since the hikers first heard it. He told me to wait. Collins leaned back in her chair, knowing they had reached the current limit of Rachel's memory. She couldn't describe the man. She didn't remember 2 years of disappearance. She didn't know the motive. She only had fragmented memories of cold, darkness, food, and the reminder to wait. But what sent chills down everyone's spines was the obvious truth. Rachel Monroe was not panicking, not confused, not doubtful, not angry. She was calm. Calm to the point where it didn't resemble someone just rescued, like someone who had accepted life inside the cave, and even understood it in a way no one else could. Immediately after obtaining Rachel's fragmented but deeply haunting statement, the ISB investigation team and forensic analysts began reconstructing the entire 3-year disappearance timeline, a monumental task, since Rachel's memory was broken, and the cave scene was a mix of old traces, new ones, and things deliberately rearranged. However, Zion has its own way of recording truth. In the ash layers, in dried mud stuck under rocks, in pollen blown in each season, and in faint footprints that natural light never completely erases. The cave area was sealed off the same day Rachel was found. Special investigators were brought in, along with experts in microtrace detection in wilderness environments. A handheld LiDAR was used to create detailed terrain maps, combined with geological analysis and airflow simulation in the cave. producing a 3D model of how dust, ash, pollen, and human breath had moved in that enclosed space. Ash and fire cycles, evidence of prolonged stay in phases. The ash layers in the cave were not uniform. Dark layers, light layers, layers turned to fine dust, layers still clumped, each a timestamp. When ash samples were separated and analyzed via carbon spectroscopy, results showed at least 9 fire cycles spanning the 3 years, with intervals of 3 to 6 months between each. This meant Rachel was not in the cave completely continuously. The unidentified man returned in regular cycles, bringing food, repairing snares, lighting fires, possibly checking on Rachel. Notably, the topmost ash layer's heat breakdown matched weather analysis. It was lit only 2 to 4 days before Rachel was found. Meaning, the man had been there very close to when the Colorado hikers arrived. This aligned with Rachel's statement. He's not here right now. Pollen proof, Rachel left the cave multiple times. Zion has a unique feature. Each season, each wildflower type only exists in certain areas. Pollen samples from Rachel's hair, pollen samples from the blanket, and pollen samples stuck on cave walls were all different. Pollen inside the cave reflected the pollen bed of the overhanging rock dome area above, where few flowers bloom due to lack of light. But Rachel's hair contained pollen from Mariposa lily, a species that only grows in lower areas, at least half a mile from the cave. This meant Rachel had left the cave at least 3 different times, each time picking up season-specific pollen. When asked, Rachel only shook her head. Maybe I did go out, but I don't remember. Mud on shoes, mud under rocks, traces of the third party. Rachel was wearing old torn shoes, almost worn through the soles, but the mud stuck to her shoes did not match the mud layer in the cave area. Sediment analysis showed Rachel's shoes had mud from the small spring area, Hidden Spring, nearly 1 mile from the cave. But in the cave there was another type of mud, completely unmatched to any place Rachel had been. This left the investigation team speechless. That was mud from the other man's shoes. The mud layer was too fresh to be from 2022, proving this person had still been coming here in the most recent months. Insect samples recording the man's absences and returns. In the fire area and around the canned food placement, entomologists discovered multiple layers of insect remains. Bottom layer had high insect activity, human presence. Middle layer completely absent, cave, abandoned for long periods, many months. Top layer again showed insects killed by heat. The man returned and lit fires. This revealed an extremely clear pattern. Cave abandoned, then used, then abandoned again, then used again. Rachel did not live continuously with the man. He only appeared periodically. Third shoe print, the second shadow in the story. Besides the small shoe prints belonging to the man, faint prints in the cave area, the investigation team unexpectedly discovered a third shoe print, larger than Rachel's shoes, but not matching the pattern of the man's shoes previously analyzed. Size 10.5 US type of shoe specialized for mountain trekking. It was located in a deeper side branch of the cave where Rachel could not have gone alone due to lack of light and sufficient air. This turned everything upside down. Besides Rachel and the unidentified man, a third person had entered the cave. Not an ordinary hiker, because that position was inaccessible without advanced skills. Not a ranger. Not the search team. When asked about this third person, Rachel only shook her head slowly. I don't remember anyone else. Food not self-foraged, but supplied. DNA analysis on the canned tins, Ziploc bags, and remaining packaging scraps in rock crevices showed multiple brands purchased at different times. Some types only sold at small shops in Springdale, others only available at convenience stores 40 miles from Zion. This clearly proved someone regularly supplied food for 3 years. Could not be Rachel. Could not be randomly abandoned. Could not be hikers. They had no reason to hide supplies in a sealed cave. When all data was placed on the board in the meeting room, Connor Hale concluded, first week, Rachel followed a man into the cave, voluntarily or lured. First 3 to 4 months, the man stayed with Rachel, lighting fires multiple times. First year, Rachel left the cave at least twice, based on pollen and mud traces. Middle of second year, Cave abandoned long-term. No fire activity, no new food. Second to third year. The man returned several times, supplying food, adjusting snares, and sleeping in the cave. Final period. Third-person shoe print appeared, deeper than where Rachel had gone. 3 to 4 days before discovery. Final fire lit. The man left right before the hikers arrived. Rachel sat waiting in the cave, calm, without attempting escape. Connor looked at the complete timeline board in silence. Everything led to a conclusion no one wanted to voice, but everyone understood clearly. Rachel Monroe did not survive alone. She was kept alive, guarded, and possibly prepared to wait for the day she would be found. Once the 3-year timeline was reconstructed and pieced together like a torn map reassembled, the investigation team moved to the next step, determining which of the people present in Zion on the day Rachel disappeared could be the man in the cave. The list of over 100 people was filtered through multiple layers of information: evidence of leaving the park, GPS, statements, shuttle camera footage, purchase receipts, and in that list, one name quickly rose to the top of the analysis board. Evan Rourke. Evan, 38 years old in 2022, resident of Salt Lake City, seasonal worker, and frequent traveler. He appeared in the shuttle log on the exact morning Rachel entered Zion, making him one of the last people to enter the park before Rachel was last seen by witnesses. But the investigation team's attention did not stop there. A report from a convenience store near Springdale surfaced. Evan had purchased multiple snack items and canned goods identical to those found in the cave: Spam, canned beans, and the cheap canned soup. Of course, this alone was not enough to conclude anything. Many hikers buy similar items before long trips. But the strange coincidence was that Evan bought quantities far exceeding what one person would need for a day hike. Even the receipt showed he purchased thin steel wire, the exact type found in the cave as a rabbit snare. Connor Hale, reading the report, said directly, "This is no longer ordinary coincidence." The investigation team located Evan 3 years later, still living in Utah. When invited for questioning, he appeared cooperative, no resistance, no evasion. But that very excessive cooperation made many feel uneasy, as if Evan had prepared his story in advance. In the interrogation room, Evan sat straight, hands interlaced. Collins asked, "Do you remember what you did on June 18, 2022? Evan nodded immediately. "I was hiking. Alone. But I wasn't with anyone." Connor pushed the file folder across the table. "You bought Spam, canned beans, and binding wire. Why so much for a one-day hike?" Evan shrugged. "I like to prepare more than necessary. And I often make rabbit snares on longer trips. Just a personal hobby." The answer sounded fine, but it didn't fit the case's nature. Collins pressed further. "Did you see Rachel Monroe that day?" Evan leaned back in the chair. "I don't know who she is." The investigation team did not believe him. Shuttle camera timing data showed Evan boarded the bus just 11 minutes after Rachel left the stop. They were not far apart. Another witness remembered seeing a man in a brown or green jacket, very similar to Witness A's description of the man with Rachel. Evan that day was also wearing a green jacket, based on camera footage. But throughout that day, Evan left no phone signals, no GPS, no calls, no messages. "I left my phone in the car," he stated. "I like to disconnect from technology when hiking." One detail choked the investigation team. Evan's timeline had a gap exactly from 11:17 a.m. to 5:46 p.m., the exact period Rachel vanished. When asked about this, Evan answered with suspicious calm, "No one can prove where I was. I was alone." Collins looked straight into his eyes. "Were you in the cave with Rachel?" Evan burst out laughing. "I don't even know there's a cave." The answer was too easy, too perfect, too clean, and what tangled everything up was when the DNA results from the cave returned. No match with Evan Rourke. Not a single sample in the cave contained his DNA, not on blankets, not in fire ash, not on food, not on walls, not on the rabbit snare. No skin cells, no hair, no sweat. This result collapsed previous assumptions in seconds. If Evan was the man supplying food to Rachel or living with her, his DNA would almost certainly appear. But none. However, The no-match result did not clear Evan, because it opened a new layer of suspicion. Evan might not be the man living in the cave, but he could be the third person. Investigator Simmons proposed the hypothesis. It's possible Evan supplied food to the man in the cave. An off-grid dweller would have difficulty regularly buying supplies in Springdale without detection. But Evan could, Connor agreed. He could be the link. Not the one directly living in the cave, but the supplier. A form of accomplice. Collins asked Evan, "Do you know anyone living near Zion? Have you ever noticed anyone following you?" Evan replied, "No. Have you ever given food to anyone? Or been asked by someone to bring items to a specific location?" Evan, "No." The smooth testimony in the style of however many questions, however many I don't remember, made Connor feel chilled. Evan showed no worry about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He displayed no unease upon learning Rachel had survived. He asked nothing related to her. The only thing he cared about was, "Can I go home yet?" Despite no DNA found, the investigation team still kept Evan as a suspect. The points making him suspicious were too many to ignore. Present in Zion the day Rachel disappeared. Purchased the exact types of food in the cave. Purchased rabbit snare wire. Wearing a jacket matching the witness description. Timeline with a gap. No phone signals proving location. In the internal working file, Connor wrote, "Evan Rourke, not the man in the cave. Possibly the man behind the man." The Rachel case continued to grow more complicated. Evan might not be the shadowy figure the AI detected, but he seemed like someone who knew more than he said. And his perfect silence, exactly like the silence Rachel described about the man in the cave, made the investigation team realize this journey was longer than they thought. Evan Rourke's file remained open, but Connor understood they were facing something larger than a single suspect. The ash layers in the cave, the food supply cycles, and the third shoe print indicated a secret ecosystem operating right in the heart of Zion, silent, elusive, existing below the surface like the shadow of a nameless entity. And when the investigation team reviewed old data archives, suddenly an unofficial name surfaced, mentioned in scattered accounts over 18 years. A name not in any database, not on permit lists, not on cameras, not in shuttle ticket systems. A name hikers gave to the figure they only glimpsed, but never approached. The ghost camper. Scattered accounts over 18 years, the silhouette of someone who did not want to be seen. Connor requested the records team extract all strange, unclear reports submitted to the Ranger Information System, since 2007 reports previously overlooked because unrelated to accidents or park violations. In just a few hours, they gathered over 40 accounts. A group of hikers said they saw a man standing motionless on a canyon edge at sunset, not moving, not looking at them, then vanishing when they blinked. A tour guide recounted once seeing a small firelight from an area where campfires are impossible in late winter. A local photographer remembered encountering a man with very dark eyes, standing about 200 meters away, then disappearing when he turned back to focus. A couple reported hearing footsteps following them for 10 minutes in the afternoon, but seeing no one when turning around. A long-distance trekker said that for 3 consecutive nights, he felt someone watching from above. He shone his light up the rock edge and saw a human shadow there for about a second. All shared common points. 1. No one could approach. 2. No one captured a clear photo. 3. The man never left footprints, items, or trash, as if he intentionally left no traces. That was why hikers named him Ghost Camper, the Ghost Camper. Not in any system sign of a professional off-grid dweller. Ranger Simmons reviewed each report, then nodded. This person isn't some homeless drifter who wandered into Zion. This is someone with skills. Connor added, high skills, very high, because living off-grid in Zion for 18 years without ever leaving clear footprints, without being photographed, without being detected by rangers, means he knows the terrain better than we do. Ghost Camper seemed to know how to use rock slots for concealment, know how to move on slick rock without leaving marks, know how to hear people from afar and avoid contact, see in low light conditions, cross rock edges that ordinary hikers wouldn't dare step on. A veteran ranger even said, "If Zion is our home by day, it's his by night." The unexpected connection between Ghost Camper and Rachel's cave. When the investigation team overlaid the map of sightings, reports of seeing him on the terrain model, they were startled to realize 6 out of 14 locations where hikers reported seeing Ghost Camper were within a 1-mile radius around the cave where Rachel was found. No one had noticed this before because no one thought the scattered sightings over many years formed a cluster. But when pieced together, they lay along connections of hidden rock slots, a concealed network most visitors never knew. The area the AI identified in the footage also overlapped with the region where hikers once heard footsteps behind them. Ghost Camper was not a random phenomenon. He was someone who knew every grain of Zion's rock, and the likelihood he was connected to the cave, almost certain. Possibly stalking visitors from afar. Dangerous behavior pattern. Deeper analysis showed Ghost Camper never made direct contact with hikers, but always maintained safe distance from afar. This fit the cave data. Things were watching. Things were watching. Thanks for watching. Things were watching. Rachel said, "He was very quiet. No signs of struggle. No clear signs of coercion. The man only appeared in cycles, and he always watched the cave entrance, as if guarding against something." Many behavioral experts assessed Ghost Camper might be a territorial obsessive type, viewing Zion as his own place, seeking to avoid the outside world, but also monitoring those entering his territory. Rachel might not be the first person he approached, just the first one found. Not an ordinary hiker's shoe prints matching the first person. The faint shoe prints found near the cave type not matching Rachel or Evan had a tread pattern no longer manufactured for the past 15 years. It was the Merrell Falcon 2008 mountain climbing shoe, a rare model, no longer sold on the market, but it had appeared in a 2011 account from a hiker who once saw Ghost Camper. He wore old torn shoes, looked like from another era, the witness said. Connor pinned a photo of the shoe on the board, next to the line. Unknown male, likely Ghost Camper. New hypothesis. Ghost Camper is the man in the cave. Piecing it all together. Sightings over 18 years. Old shoes. Knowledge of secret paths. Ability to monitor from afar. Complete disappearance when rangers approached. 3 to 6 month fire cycles. Food regularly brought into the cave. Rachel said. He didn't use names. No doubt left Ghost Camper was the second suspect in the Rachel Monroe case. Not an illusion. Not folklore. But a real person. Someone living in Zion's shadows for nearly 2 decades. Someone with enough skill, experience, and detachment from the world to do things beyond ordinary hikers. And if Ghost Camper was the man living with Rachel in the cave, then the biggest question was no longer who he was, but why did he choose Rachel? And what was he waiting for when telling Rachel wait? That answer would lead the investigation into the most dangerous part of the case. Just as data on Ghost Camper was compiled, another discovery more important, deeper, and more frightening emerged from the evidence analysis room. The scattered clue once dismissed as meaningless, the paper scrap with seed on, found near the fire ash, suddenly became the golden key opening a whole new investigation direction. Was not an unfinished word, but a full name. At first, the investigation team guessed it might be an incomplete word. Stone, Stony, Stanton, Strong. But when combining it with the Ghost Camper sightings map and the list of missing persons recorded in areas near Zion, one name stood out as if pulling itself from the darkness. Mark Stoner. Connor Hale nearly jumped up when the name appeared in the report. Stoner. Perfect match. Concise. Exact. And especially fitting for a torn scrap with rain-blurred ending letters. Mark Stoner disappeared in 2016. Near the Kolob Terrace Road area, a region bordering Zion, with few visitors but famous for ancient sandstone systems and deep slot paths into the mountain heart. At the time, Stoner was conducting freelance geological surveying, which meant no clear check-in times and no one noticed when he didn't return. The record noted only a brief line, no body found, no belongings found. Case turned cold. But in the ranger system, a few still remembered that time. Mark Stoner was described as quiet, introspective, often alone, knowing terrain better than average, and especially disliking social contact. Everything matched perfectly with the descriptions of the ghost camper over the past 18 years. Discovery in the cave tool engraved with Stoner 4. The items recovered from the cave were sealed immediately after Rachel was brought out, but one detail initially overlooked now became the investigation's explosive turning point. In a compact tool pouch neatly hidden under a rock in the cave corner, there was an old rock chisel. Rusty and worn, but still legible, were faint metal-engraved letters. Stoner Fira. No one paid much attention at first. It could be a brand name. It could be a technical code. But when cross-referenced with Mark Stoner's file, the investigation team was stunned. Mark had worked for a private surveying team with a tool numbering system based on each person's surname. The 4 mark meant the 4th tool set belonging to him, an internal designation only those who had done geological surveying would understand. Connor stared at the chisel for a long time, then said, "This can't be coincidence." The man who disappeared in Zion in 2016 and matched the ghost camper description, Mark Stoner, 36 years old at the time of his disappearance. Characteristics: approximately 6 feet tall, dark brown hair, habit of long-term camping, very high climbing and survival skills, expert in geology and Utah terrain, tendency to avoid society, often did not use phone during surveys. And most importantly, no body found. No one saw him leave Zion. In the internal 2016 report, one ranger had written, "Possible that Mark voluntarily entered unexpanded park area." Now looking back, Connor understood. Mark did not leave Zion. He stayed. DNA in the cave. The key that clarified everything. When the male DNA collected from the blanket and wall was run through CODIS, there was no hit because Mark had no criminal record. But when the investigation team tried genetic genealogy, cross-referencing with distant relatives in open genealogy databases, the results silenced the entire room. Match 40% nearly equivalent to first or second-degree relative in the Stoner lineage. 40% was not a direct match, but enough to conclude. The DNA in the cave very likely belonged to a male in the Stoner family, and the closest was Mark Stoner. Results confirmed by 3 independent experts. Connor placed the report on the table, circling the scientific conclusion in red pen. Unidentified male DNA is consistent with the genetic profile of the Stoner family, with highest probability belonging to Mark Stoner, missing since 2016. Everything snapped together like the final piece of a years-long puzzle. The cave became a second home, and Rachel was not the only one who had been there. When deeply analyzing the oldest pollen, ash, and food remnants in the cave, experts realized some ash layers dated earlier than 2018, meaning before Rachel disappeared. This proved the cave had been used since Mark Stoner was alive. The network of passages in the cave was not discovered overnight. Mark may have found this place while doing geological surveying. Ghost camper, the figure hikers described for years, was very likely Mark Stoner living in isolation after his disappearance. Rachel once wrote the name St. on as an attempt to recall. A psychological expert analyzed the wet paper scrap and St. on letters. This is a memory trigger writing pattern. Rachel may have tried to record his name, but due to suggestion or fear, she couldn't complete it. If true, then Rachel once knew Mark's name, or heard him introduce himself in the early days. Her loss of 2 continuous years of memory may relate to lack of light, suggestion, psychological control, or trauma causing memories to separate into layers. In the internal meeting, Connor wrote on the board, Mark Stoner equals likely the man in the cave. Ston equals his name. DNA supports this. He survived Zion for 9 years. A young ranger whispered, "So, Mark Stoner pulled Rachel into his world?" Connor replied, voice heavy as canyon rock. Not just pulled her in. He had been there, waiting for someone, for nearly a decade. The St. on clue, once seen as fate's joke, now became the pivot of the entire case. Rachel was not simply lost, not simply abducted, not simply rescued. She had been kept in a secret world created by Mark Stoner, a man missing since 2016. A ghost on Zion's cliffs. A real ghost camper. And the one who told Rachel, wait. Wait for whom? Wait for what? That would be the question, leading the investigation into its most dangerous phase. After concluding the cave, DNA matched 40% with the Stoner family, most likely Mark Stoner. Missing since 2016, the investigation team immediately expanded the file to all living relatives. And the name at the top of the list, the closest blood relative, and someone who had been active in the Utah area for years, was Jacob Stoner, Mark's half-brother. Jacob, 42 years old, lived about 60 miles from Zion, in an old wooden cabin, deep in the forest, near Kolob Reservoir, a place so remote that cell signal flickered only with the wind. Like Mark, Jacob worked freelance, lived isolated, and had almost no social interactions. No one had thought of him for years, because old records noted Jacob not dangerous, no criminal record, no connection to the 2016 disappearance. But now, with clues about Mark leading straight to Zion and Rachel living in a cyclically prepared cave, Jacob became an unavoidable investigation target. Jacob's cabin, undeniable traces. On October 14, 2025, the search warrant for the cabin was approved. When ISB and Washington County Sheriff entered the silent pine needle-covered property, they did not expect to find much. But within 10 minutes of searching, everything changed completely. Connor Hale was the first to see the map taped behind a wooden cabinet door. He stood frozen for a few seconds. The map was not a Zion tourist map, not a national park map, not one bought from a store. This was a hand-drawn, detailed terrain map noting every rock slot, every wind direction, every small water vein, and most importantly, a red ink line circled the exact area of the cave where Rachel was found. Not only that, next to the red circle were markings, M4, M6, M12. Markings the analysis team later confirmed were Mark Stoner's movement waypoints from his 2016 survey information, never publicized in any documents. Only family members or those who surveyed with Mark would know these markings, the analyst concluded. And that wasn't all. In the nearby drawer, they found a stack of receipts. Canned spam, cheap canned soup, steel wire for snares, disposable lighters, thin cheap wool blankets, all matching items found in the cave. Connor flipped through each receipt. The oldest from 2020. The most recent, 3 months before Rachel was found. A discovery that chilled the entire team. In an old box under the cabinet, they found a Panasonic Lumix travel camera with the memory card still intact. No one knew what Jacob photographed. He lived alone. No social media, no family photos stored. But when the technician viewed the memory in the cabin, the entire team froze. There were 73 photos. 70 were of mountains, rocks, sky, forest. The remaining 3 were not landscapes. They were shots of Zion from very far away, using maximum zoom, but when enlarged, the investigation team clearly saw the trail branch where Rachel disappeared in 2022. Date taken, June 14, 2022, 4 days before Rachel vanished. Who photographed that area 4 days before a woman disappeared in that exact spot? Who kept those photos for 3 years without deleting them? Jacob Stoner. Jacob returned to the cabin and was arrested immediately. While the investigation team was collecting samples at the scene, Jacob's old gray Ford truck appeared on the trail ahead. He stepped out of the vehicle in absolute silence, hands holding a grocery bag. Seeing the police, he did not run, did not act surprised, did not ask what was happening. He only said one thing, "Finally, you've come." Connor stepped forward. Jacob Stoner, by order of the Washington County Sheriff, you are being detained for questioning in the disappearance and unlawful detention of Rachel Monroe. Jacob did not resist, did not say anything more, just held out both hands forward. His face showed no fear, no anger, no confusion, only a sense of acceptance, silence, exactly like Rachel's description of the man in the cave. The things making Jacob the #1 suspect. When Jacob was brought to the station, the list of suspicions rose like a wall. Cabin had detailed Zion map, marking the exact cave location. Receipts for food identical to items in the cave. Photos of Zion at the exact area Rachel disappeared, at the exact time. Blood relation to Mark Stoner. Lived near Zion, able to come and go easily. No one knew what he did for years. Reclusive personality. Matching the description of a second ghost camper, the third person in the timeline. Connor concluded in the initial report. Jacob Stoner may not be the man living in the cave, but very likely the one supporting Mark Stoner, or continuing Mark's behavior after Mark disappeared. One question immediately arose. Is Mark Stoner still alive? If the DNA in the cave belongs to Mark and Jacob has the cave map, then there is a horrifying possibility. Jacob continued keeping Rachel alive because Mark asked him to. Or Jacob found where Mark lived and took over Mark's role. As Jacob was handcuffed and led to the vehicle, he turned back to look at Connor, eyes dark as canyon rock. He said quietly, almost whispering, "You're looking for the wrong person." The statement sent chills down the entire team and led straight into the most dangerous phase of the case. Mark Stoner may still be alive and may still be hiding in Zion's maze of rock slots. The preliminary hearing took place on October 22, 2025, at the Washington County Courthouse. From early morning, the courthouse grounds were surrounded by television vans. Cameras lined the hallways, reporters jostling for position. No one had forgotten the image of Rachel Monroe, the woman missing for 3 years, sitting calmly in the cave, smiling as if the outside world no longer concerned her. And now, they wanted to hear the truth from the man accused of involvement in that horror. Jacob Stoner. Jacob was led into the courtroom with hands cuffed, face cold as canyon rock. No struggling, no lowering his head, no looking around. He walked like someone who knew exactly what he would say and who would listen. Judge Vaughn opened the hearing, and from the first minutes, the story revolved around the biggest question. Did Jacob Stoner keep Rachel Monroe for 3 years? Jacob sat before the microphone, his lawyer beside him, but never needing to interrupt because Jacob decided to tell the entire story his way. Jacob opened with a statement that exploded the courtroom. When the prosecutor asked, "Did you bring food into the cave? Did you assist anyone living there?" Jacob raised his head, looked straight at the judge, and said in a clear, unshaking voice, "My uncle Mark Stoner is still alive." A murmur erupted in the room. Many people jerked their heads up. Several reporters hurriedly messaged their editors. Connor Hale, sitting in the back row, gripped his hands until his knuckles turned white. Jacob spoke slowly, each word carved into the air. "I didn't keep Rachel. I only brought food to her. I did it at Mark's request." The judge called for order, but everything was already beyond control. Jacob continued. "Mark found that cave in 2016, before he disappeared. He saw it as a shelter. I just continued the supply cycle. When he vanished." "You supplied for whom? Rachel or Mark?" the prosecutor asked. Jacob answered immediately, "For both. At first, for Mark. Later, for Rachel." "Did you ever meet them at the same time?" Jacob shook his head. "No. Let's call it that, never met face to face. That was Mark's rule." Jacob testified about Mark and cast an even darker shadow over the case. The prosecutor tapped his pen on the table. "Are you saying Mark Stoner, who was presumed dead, is actually living in Zion? In the very cave system where Rachel was found?" Jacob breathed lightly, as if the remaining questions were all simple. "Mark never left Zion. He lives there, but not in that cave. There are many caves. You only know one." Ranger Simmons in the back placed a hand on his forehead. The room fell into a state hard to distinguish between shock and belief. Jacob continued. "Mark didn't want the world to find him. He chose to disappear. But when he saw Rachel, I don't know how he first encountered her. He asked me to bring food in 4-month cycles." "Where is Mark now?" the prosecutor asked. Jacob leaned forward on the table, looking straight into the prosecutor's eyes. "If you want to find Mark, you will never find him that way. Do you know where he lives?" Jacob pressed his lips together, then shook his head. "Mark never revealed it. I only knew where to leave the food. The location changed each time." Rachel entered the hearing and shattered all investigative logic. Just as Jacob delivered his shocking testimony, Rachel was invited into the courtroom. She walked slowly, wearing a loose hospital-provided sweater, hair lightly tied back. Not like a victim, not like someone detained, not like someone unhinged, like someone who had lived in a different world. The prosecutor asked Rachel, "Did you meet Mark Stoner during the 3 years in the cave?" Rachel looked at the wooden table in front of her, thinking for a few seconds. Then she said the sentence that froze the courtroom. "I met 2 men." A wave of shock spread through the room. Jacob looked down. Connor stood up abruptly, heart pounding like a drum. The prosecutor asked immediately, "Can you identify them? Was one of them Jacob Stoner?" Rachel shook her head slowly, very slowly. "No. Jacob was not the man living in the cave with me." The judge asked, "What about the second man?" Rachel narrowed her eyes as if trying to pull memory from the darkness. She whispered, "The second man came later. He didn't live there. He just went deeper." A heavy silence descended. Jacob whispered, almost unconsciously, "That wasn't me." Jacob was remanded in custody, but the case suddenly became darker than ever. Despite Jacob's shocking testimony, the physical evidence in the cabin was enough to keep him detained for investigation. Complex Zion cave map, matching food receipts, photos of Zion, taken exactly where Rachel disappeared 4 days prior, survival items identical to those in the cave. The judge ruled, Jacob Stoner is remanded without bail until testimony verification. Jacob, before being led away, turned to Connor and said slowly, word by word, "Mark is still alive, and you're going somewhere you shouldn't." Connor felt a chill down his spine. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be the first step in charging Jacob Stoner, but instead, it opened a larger door, a door leading into a world only Rachel and Mark had seen. Rachel said there were 2 men. Jacob said Mark is alive, and he only followed Mark's instructions. Mark was still not found, and most importantly, Rachel was not panicking at that information. She just sat there, calm and smiling. 3 months after the preliminary hearing, when the media frenzy had temporarily subsided and Rachel Monroe had been transferred to a long-term psychological recovery facility, the joint investigation team of ISB, Washington County Sheriff, and FBI officially released the case's interim conclusion. But the conclusion they issued was not an ending. It was more like an open report, filled with questions far larger than what they had answered. The case was classified under the rarest category in the National Investigation System, unresolved third-party involvement, a classification reserved for disappearances where human involvement is clear, but the identity, role, or actions of that person cannot be verified to legal standards. The Rachel Monroe case became the 17th case in 30 years in the United States to receive this code. Rachel survived due to external support. The first and most important conclusion of the investigation team. Rachel could not have survived alone in the cave for 3 years. All evidence was consistent. Food. The cave contained over 20 types of canned goods, all with production dates spanning 2022 to 2025. None matched what Rachel carried the day she vanished. None fit the quantity for a single individual over 3 continuous years. Rabbit snares her. The snare wire was adjusted multiple times, showing wear marks. Rachel had no such skills. The man or men maintained a protein source for her in cycles. Fire ash. At least 9 ash layers, meaning fires, were lit in multiple separate phases, months apart. Fire cannot light itself. The cave cannot maintain heat on its own. Rachel could not have maintained such a regular fire cycle if she lost 2 years of memory as stated. Pollen and insect analysis and Rachel alone could not have left multiple different pollen types in the cave. Some types only exist in areas nearly 1 mile away. Evidence proving she left the cave at least 3 times, or someone took her out and brought her back. Shoe prints. 2 male shoe print samples, not belonging to Jacob, and not to any recorded visitor. One matched the shoe type hikers described when sighting the ghost camper. Everything indicated 1 man or 2 cared for Rachel, not for a day, not for a month, but for 3 years. Jacob was not the man in the cave, but definitely involved. Jacob's cabin contained enough physical evidence to hold him criminally responsible. Zion map, marking cave location. Matching food receipts. Steel wire for snares. Photos of Zion taken exactly where Rachel disappeared, 4 days before. Climbing tools, blankets, lighters identical to those in the cave. But DNA in the cave did not match Jacob. Investigator Collins concluded. Jacob was the supporter, not the captor, not the one living with Rachel. Jacob remained silent after the hearing, offering no further statements. He only left the haunting words. Mark knows you're looking for him. Rachel confirmed the existence of 2 men. In all interrogation sessions, Rachel remained consistent. 1. She was not in the cave alone. 2. One man lived with her in the early period. 3. A second man appeared later. Most importantly, she said, the man in the cave was not Jacob. The second man did not stay long. He went deeper. When pressed further, Rachel always shook her head, as if her memory continuously hit a solid black wall she could not penetrate. She remembered the first days. She remembered the silent figure. She remembered the words, "Wait." But she did not remember why she had to wait, did not remember the man's face, did not remember how she entered the cave, did not remember why she did not want to leave. She only remembered that she never felt imprisoned, just not safe outside. The man's DNA in the cave, the biggest mystery. Final federal lab results. Male DNA, 40% match with the Stoner family. Matching uncle, nephew, or first cousin relationship. No match in CODIS, meaning the man had never been arrested or officially DNA sampled. IS DNA match with Mark Stoner's branch. This reinforced the hypothesis. The man living in the cave was almost certainly Mark Stoner. No DNA sample from the second man, Calla. One expert assessed, the second man appeared very briefly, or was extremely careful. This fit Rachel's words. He just went deeper. No complete fingerprints. No sweat. No hair. No one knew who the second man was. Mark Stoner, alive or dead? The biggest question no one could answer. What Mark left behind? Survey tool engraved Stoner 4. Faint old shoe prints deeper in the cave. Fire cycle spanning 3 years. The incomplete note. St. on. Possibly Rachel trying to recall his name. What Mark did not leave. No sleeping bag. No backpack. No clothing. No personal items. No body. If Mark had died, decomposition traces would appear. But there were none. If Mark was alive, he would have to live in extremely harsh conditions. But the cave system and traces of warmth, pollen, and ash suggested Mark may have moved deeper into areas no one had ever explored. After 11 months of analysis, modeling, interrogation, and evidence review, the final FBI ISB report stated, Rachel Monroe survived due to consistent external assistance. A male individual, likely Mark Stoner, provided food, shelter, maintenance, and limited supervision. Evidence strongly suggests a second unknown male entered the cave briefly. Case closed. As unresolved third-party involvement. Meaning, Rachel did not survive on her own. One man, almost certainly Mark, sustained her life. A second unidentified man appeared. No one knew why they did it. The case lacked sufficient evidence to charge anyone. The questions never answered. At the final press conference, one reporter asked, "Is Rachel afraid the man in the cave will come back for her?" Connor answered in a low voice, "She is not afraid." Another reporter asked, "Will he come back?" Connor paused for a few seconds, then said, "We don't know." Indeed, the biggest questions remained open. 1. Where is Mark Stoner? Zion spans over 230 square miles, with thousands of unmapped rock slots. With someone who knows the terrain, he could hide for a lifetime. 2. Why did Mark take Rachel into the cave? Protection? Isolation? Territorial obsession? Psychological instability? No one knew. 3. Who was the second man? A curious hiker? An accomplice? Another stoner? Or a second off-grid dweller in Zion? No data. 4. Who was Rachel's St. on? Note written for? A cry for help? An attempt to remember? Or a way to prevent herself from forgetting? No one knew. 5. Why did Rachel smile when found? The biggest question. The answer was the only thing that chilled the investigation team. Rachel said, "Because I knew that day would come. When asked who told her that, Rachel only replied, "He did." The investigation team closed the case at the legal level. But those who had directly entered the cave, those who had looked into the deeper darkness beyond where Rachel sat, all understood this case was not truly over, not while Mark Stoner disappeared a second time, not while the second man's DNA remained unidentified, not while over 1,200 unexplored rock slots existed in Zion, and certainly not while Rachel still sometimes turned to the window, looked toward the canyon, and said softly, so quietly the person beside her had to hold their breath to hear, "He's still out there." The final question no investigator dared answer. Where did the man in the cave go? And is he still hiding in Zion, watching anyone who enters his territory? The story of Rachel Monroe, the woman who vanished in Zion, survived 3 years thanks to a mysterious and vague source of support on the border between truth, fear, and manipulation touches on many very real issues in today's American life. The first thing that stands out is human vulnerability in the face of vast nature. Zion, Yellowstone, or the Grand Canyon each year record missing persons cases where not every family receives an answer. Rachel's case reveals a troubling reality. With just one moment of wrong direction or one wrong encounter, an individual can completely disappear from the world without anyone knowing. The detail that Rachel's phone was forcibly turned off and GPS data was lost for 30 minutes reminds us that technology does not always protect people. Relying on phones in wilderness environments or emergency situations easily creates a false sense of security, a point that many U.S. rescue experts have warned about for years. The second lesson relates to mental health and the impact of isolation. Rachel remembers nothing of the 2 years in between, and her description of not feeling safe when outside reflects a dissociative state seen in many victims of long-term isolation or those living under controlled conditions. This is very close to the issues spreading across the United States: loneliness, mental health crises, and the vulnerability of people living independently or traveling alone. In many cases in America, those who are emotionally coerced or manipulated do not realize they are being controlled, just like Rachel, who did not consider herself imprisoned, even though she was kept alive in a cave. Finally, the story gives us a reminder about community responsibility. Rachel was found only because 3 hikers accidentally strayed off trail, and they did not ignore the faint breathing in the wind. That is an important reminder for American life. Pay attention to things that feel off around you. The neighbor who suddenly disappears, a person who quietly changes their habits, a small cry in the woods, a car parked in the wrong place for too long. A small act of attention can save a life. If you want to continue following unresolved mysteries like Rachel Monroe's case and many other journeys into the darkness, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we will continue exploring the hidden corners that ordinary light never reaches.